My family stole $120,000 to give it to my sister, but when I sued them, they had to sell the house and returned $138,000. While I got a full scholarship, they'll never forget. I'm 17 years old, just graduated from high school, and a few months ago I discovered that my parents basically stole my future. I know it sounds dramatic, but it's literal. Like, I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. When my grandparents died about 5 years ago, they left me $120,000 specifically for my college education. It was in their will and everything, and it turns out my parents used that money to buy my older sister a house. A whole house. And the worst part isn't just that they did it, but how they told me, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Let me backtrack a bit so you understand the whole situation. I grew up in a family where it was always obvious that my sister Christine was the favorite. She's 25 now. She's a kindergarten teacher. And honestly, she's a good person. Or at least I thought she was. For as long as I can remember, everything revolved around Christine. You know, the first at everything, the perfect one, the one who never did anything wrong. I was more like the backup daughter, let's say. My parents were never abusive or anything like that, but the difference in how they treated us was super obvious. Christine wanted to take ballet classes. They'd pay for them without thinking twice. I wanted to take art classes, and it was this whole drama about money and whether I really needed it. When my paternal grandparents died, I was about 12 years old. I remember it was horrible, especially losing my grandmother because she always paid more attention to me than my own parents did. You know? She was the only one who was really interested in my drawings and what I wanted to study. My grandparents were middle class. Nothing spectacular, but they had been saving for years. At the funeral, I vaguely heard something about a college fund, but I was a kid and sad, so I didn't pay much attention. My parents told me that my grandparents had left money for my education and not to worry, that when it came time to go to college, everything would be covered. And for years, that was my peace of mind. You know, when my friends stressed about how they were going to pay for college, I thought, well, at least I have that figured out thanks to my grandparents. I worked really hard in school, got good grades, participated in extracurricular activities, all while thinking about getting additional scholarships, but knowing I had that backup. Meanwhile, Christine had moved in with her boyfriend Jonathan about 3 years ago. He's a zookeeper, which sounds cool, but it's not like he makes a fortune. They lived in a tiny apartment, and I'd always hear my parents worrying about them. Like, they need a bigger place. They can't have kids in that one-bedroom apartment, blah blah blah. About a year and a half ago, when I was 16, my parents suddenly announced they were going to help Christine and Jonathan with a down payment on a house. A real house. In a decent neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, yard, the whole thing. I remember thinking, wow, how generous, but also feeling that familiar pang of jealousy because they never would have given me anything like that. Christine was super excited, posting pictures on Instagram of her new house, decorating it, everything. My parents went over all the time to help her, bought furniture, painted walls. I stayed home doing homework, basically. At the time, I didn't question it much, honestly. I figured my parents had saved up or something. Christine is 8 years older than me, so it made sense that they'd want to help her get established. I guess. But I always thought it was weird that they suddenly had so much money available when my entire life it had been this constant refrain of, we can't afford this, we have to save, money doesn't grow on trees. Fast forward to 5 months ago. I'm in my senior year of high school, applying to colleges, getting acceptance letters. I got into my first choice, a state university with a good graphic design program, and I was super excited. I ran to tell. My parents and my mom barely looked up from her phone. My dad said something like, "That's nice, honey," and went back to watching TV. But whatever. I was used to that level of enthusiasm from them. A few days later, I sat down with them to talk about college costs. I'd received some small scholarships, but they didn't cover everything. Tuition was like $15,000 a year, plus housing, books, all that. I told them, okay, so we need to figure out how we're going to use the fund that Grandma and Grandpa left. How much is there exactly? How does the process work to access that money? And my parents looked at each other with this weird expression I couldn't decipher. My mom was the one who spoke first. She said, well, about that, and I already felt something was wrong, you know? That tone of voice when someone's about to give you bad news. And then, just like that, she dropped on me that there was no money, that they'd used it to help Christine with her house. I just sat there like, sorry, what did you say? Because honestly, I couldn't process what I'd just heard. I asked them to repeat it, thinking I'd misunderstood. And my dad, with the straightest face in the world, explained that when Christine and Jonathan were house hunting a year and a half ago, they needed help with the down payment, and they decided to use my college fund for that. The full $120,000 to buy a house in my sister's and her boyfriend's name. I don't know if you've ever felt that thing where it's like the floor disappears beneath your feet. That's how I felt. I started asking them questions, like, how could they do that? That money was specifically for my education. It was in Grandma and Grandpa's will. And my mom just shrugged and said, well, your grandparents aren't here anymore, and Christine needed the help now. You can get student loans or scholarships. Student loans. They were telling me to go into debt for decades because they decided to give my money to my sister, and they said it so casually, as if it were obvious, as if I should understand. My dad even said something like, Christine is your older sister. Someday she'll help you. That's how family works. And I was there like, how is she going to help me if you gave her my money for her house? I tried to stay calm. I really tried. I told them that wasn't legal, that the money was designated specifically for me in the will, and my mom literally laughed. She laughed and said, oh, honey, you're a minor. We're your parents. We had every right to use that money however we saw fit. That I didn't understand how family finances worked. I told them I was going to sue them. I don't even know where that came from. I'd never thought about suing anyone in my life, but I was so furious and desperate that I just blurted it out. And you know what my parents did? They laughed harder. My dad said, go ahead, sue us. With what money are you going to pay for a lawyer? You don't even have a driver's license yet. And he was right. At that moment, I had nothing. No job, no savings of my own, nothing. My entire plan had been built around that college fund that turned out didn't exist anymore. That night, I went up to my room and cried like I hadn't cried since my grandmother died. It wasn't just the money, though obviously that was devastating. It was the betrayal, the fact that my parents had made this decision a year and a half ago and hadn't told me anything. They'd let me apply to colleges, get excited about my future, plan my entire life, knowing perfectly well they'd taken away my means to make it happen. And they'd done it for Christine. Again, always Christine. The next day I tried to talk to my sister. I called her and asked if she knew where the money for her house had come from. There was a long silence, and then she said that Mom and Dad had told her it was from their savings, that she didn't know anything about my college fund. I don't know if I believed her at the time, honestly. I told her that they'd basically robbed me of my future to buy her house, and she started getting defensive, saying she hadn't known anything, that it wasn't her fault, that I should talk to our parents. I hung up before saying something I'd regret. The next few days were horrible. My parents acted like nothing had happened. I couldn't even be in the same room with them without feeling like I was going to explode. I kept searching for information online about what I could do. All the results said the same thing, that if the money was in a will specifically for my education, my parents had no legal right to use it for something else. But they also said I'd need a lawyer to do anything about it, and I had no idea how to get one. A week after finding out, I packed my bags and left home. My best friend, Ava, and her family let me stay with them. My parents sent me like 3 messages of, "Where are you? Come home." But when I told them I was at Ava's house, they basically said, "Well, I hope you're happy." They didn't even try to convince me to come back. That hurt more than I expected. It was Ava's mom who suggested I try contacting other family members. I didn't have much family, honestly. My maternal grandparents had died when I was a baby, and from my dad's side, there was only his cousin William, who lived like 3 states away. I'd met William a couple of times at family gatherings when I was little, but I didn't know him well. Still, I had nothing to lose, so I looked him up on Facebook. I sent him a long message explaining the whole situation. I wasn't expecting much, honestly. I thought maybe he'd say I'm sorry, but I can't help you, or worse, that he'd take my parents' side. But William responded the next day, and he was furious. Furious with my parents, not with me. He told me my grandparents had been very clear in their will, that that money was for my education and nothing else, and that what my parents did was illegal. William turned out to be a lawyer, which I didn't know. And not just a lawyer, but he specializes in estate law. He said he was going to contact the executor of my grandparents' will, who was a local lawyer who had handled everything when they died. In less than a week, William called me with news. The executor confirmed that the money had been transferred to a custodial account in my name when I was 12, specifically designated for educational expenses. My parents, as custodians, had access to the account, but legally they could only use it for my education. What they did was definitely illegal. William told me we could sue them to recover the money, but that it would be a long and complicated process. Or we could try mediation first, basically sit down with everyone with a mediator and try to resolve things without going to court. He offered to represent me for free, said he wasn't going to let the family treat his cousin's daughter like that. I remember breaking down crying when he told me that. It was the first time in weeks that anyone from my family had. It made me feel like I mattered. We decided to start with lawyer letters. William sent a formal letter to my parents explaining that what they did was illegal and that we fully intended to recover the money, one way or another. He also sent a copy to the will's executor and apparently to Christine, though I didn't ask for that. The response was, interesting. My parents went from acting like nothing happened to total panic mode. They started sending me messages, calls, texts, emails, everything. That I was destroying the family, that I was ungrateful, that after everything they'd done for me, this is how I repaid them. My mom even sent me a voice message crying saying she never thought her own daughter would sue her. And I was like, you never thought you'd care about stealing $120,000 from me. So, I guess we're even. What surprised me was Christine. She called me one afternoon, crying, saying she didn't know the money was mine, that Mom and Dad had told her it was their savings, that they wanted to help her start her life with Jonathan. She said if she'd known the truth, she never would have accepted the money. She sounded genuine, and part of me wanted to believe her, but it was also hard to separate my anger toward her from my anger toward my parents. I told her we'd talk later, when all this was resolved. William helped me get an apartment. Well, technically he helped me with the paperwork and deposit, and I found a roommate, Lily, who was also going to college in the fall. My parents kept sending increasingly desperate messages, alternating between threats like, we're never going to help you with anything ever again, and please don't do this, we're your family. The first mediation session was tense. We all sat in a conference room, the mediator, William, me, my parents, Christine and Jonathan, and the will's executor. The mediator started by explaining that we were there to try to reach an agreement without having to go to court, that everyone had a chance to speak. I spoke first, basically repeated everything I've been telling here. That my grandparents left me that money specifically, that my parents used it illegally, that I wanted the money back so I could go to college like my grandparents had wanted. My voice shook, but I managed to say everything without crying. My parents then started with their excuses. That family should help each other, that Christine needed the help more than me because she was already an adult and was trying to start her own family, that I was young and had other options. My dad literally said, I should be grateful they helped my sister, because someday she'd let me live in that house if I needed it, as if that made everything okay. The will's executor intervened and was very clear. He said there was no ambiguity in the will, that the money was for my education, period, that my parents had violated their fiduciary duty as custodians of the account, that if this went to court, they would lose, and probably would have to pay legal fees too. Christine started crying. Jonathan was hugging her and looked super uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. Christine said she didn't want the house if it meant I couldn't go to college, that she and Jonathan could sell it and give me back the money. My parents immediately told her not to talk nonsense, that it wasn't necessary to go to those extremes. The mediator asked them what they proposed then. And that's when things got uglier. My mom suggested they could give me back part of the money, say $30,000, and I could use that plus student loans, that it was a compromise solution. William immediately said no, that the number was $120,000 plus interest. There was no compromise possible. That first session ended without resolution. We scheduled another one for 2 weeks later. In between, my parents kept trying to manipulate me. My mom sent me a long message about how she'd sacrificed her career to raise us, how she deserved to have some happiness seeing Christine settled. My dad sent me one saying I was acting like a selfish child and that I was going to regret destroying the family. The second session was more of the same. My parents offered $50,000, then $70,000, William kept saying no. I was exhausted. Honestly, part of me just wanted it all to be over, and I was tempted to accept something, anything. But William reminded me this wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. That my grandparents specifically wanted me to have a college education, and that my parents had no right to take that away from me. After the third mediation session without agreement, William initiated the formal process of suing them. He filed all the necessary documentation: the will, the custodial account records, evidence of how the money was used. The will's executor cooperated completely. Everything was documented perfectly. When my parents received the formal lawsuit papers, something changed. I think until that moment, they hadn't believed I'd actually do it. But seeing their names on legal documents, knowing this could go to public court, where everyone would find out what they did, finally got to them. We had a fourth mediation session, and this time, my parents arrived with an accountant and their own lawyer. They looked miserable, which didn't give me the satisfaction I thought it would. I just felt tired. Their lawyer basically told them they had no case, that they were going to lose in court and it would probably cost them more. He recommended they reach a settlement. After about 3 hours of negotiation, they finally agreed to return the full $120,000, plus the interest the account would have generated over the past few years if they hadn't touched it. The total amount ended up being around $138,000. They had to sell Christine's house to get the money. Christine was devastated, obviously. But I also think she genuinely felt bad about what had happened. She found me after that session and apologized, said she wished our parents had told her the truth from the beginning, that she never would have wanted the house knowing where the money came from. I believed her this time. It wasn't her fault. Not really. She'd been the tool our parents used, but they were the ones who'd made the decision. The money was transferred about a month ago. $138,000 in a new educational trust account, this time without my parents as custodians, but with the will's executor and William as co-custodians until I turn 18, which is in 2 weeks. The money can only be used for educational expenses, exactly as my grandparents wanted. Last week, I got even better news. I got a full scholarship at my university, one of those merit-based academic scholarships that covers tuition, housing, everything. With my grandparents' fund intact and the scholarship, I can basically go to college completely free and still have money left over for grad school if I want, or to start my life after graduation without debt. Christine and Jonathan are back in an apartment. They sold the house for a bit less than they paid because they needed to sell it quickly. Christine still sends me messages occasionally, asking how I am, saying she hopes we can rebuild our relationship someday. I think maybe we can. Eventually. She was a victim of our parents as much as I was, just in a different way. My parents and I haven't spoken since the last mediation session. They sent me a message when the money was transferred saying, "I hope you're happy. You destroyed this family." I didn't respond. William says they're probably going to have financial problems for a while, that they had to take out a loan against their own house to cover the full amount while Christine's house was being sold. I start college in 2 months. Lily and I already decorated our apartment. I have a part-time job at a coffee shop near campus. My life finally feels like mine. You know? Not perfect. Not without scars. But mine. Sometimes I think about my grandparents and how they'd feel seeing all this. I think they'd be proud that I fought for what they left me, that I didn't give up even when it got difficult, that I'm going to get that college education they wanted so much for me.